Hey, of Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz. Very excited to have on today Eric Stites, who is the CEO and founder of Franchise Business Review. He founded the company 17 years back and really has led the way for surveys, feedback, input from franchisees, and has worked with hundreds of franchise brands that are expanding in the US and internationally. Eric, thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
So you've been in the franchise industry for some time. It'd be great if you could just recap how you entered into the franchising space and then what the impetus was for Franchise Business Review.
Yeah, it's a great question. It seems obvious today when you think about review sites, all the different, from Glassdoor to Yelp to Amazon, all the different sites that are out there. But 17 years ago, there was nothing like this in the franchise space. And so we were really working, I had been with a number of franchise marketing companies and helping, them reach out to franchise candidates. But everybody wanted to know, the same sorts of questions. Is the training good? Is the support good? Are you making any money? And so we kind of came up with this idea of, surveying franchise owners and asking those questions, because as you're probably well aware, existing franchise owners get calls every day from people that might want to buy into the business. And obviously they're busy running their own business, so they can't always return those phone calls. So we came up with the idea of doing this. We were actually working with Dunkin' Brands at the time, who had great validation with their franchisees, but again, busy business owners didn't want to call franchise.
Well, yeah, I mean, the
candidates.
average Dunkin' franchisee, I imagine, has like 10, 20 plus units.
Yeah. And they're out on the road running from restaurant to restaurant. They don't have time to call back people that are thinking about buying a franchise. So, everybody thought it was a great idea, but then they were like, well, it would have to be third party, and so I was working for a marketing company at the time, who was actually being acquired, and they were thinking about having everybody sign a 2-year non-compete to stay with the company. And so the timing was just good for me to leave and kind of start this on my own. And so, I started calling everybody I knew in the franchise industry and, said, we want to survey your franchisees and share that information with candidates. And for the most part, everybody thought I was crazy.
Is it just because they thought like the collection aspect would take a long time, or
yeah, I think they were more concerned about what their franchisees might actually say.
That's a problem.
Right, exactly. So it's interesting. We spent about a year trying to figure it out. We knew, one thing that we definitely knew is that franchise companies were very competitive. So we came up with the idea of doing awards based on satisfaction. And in the next 2 months after announcing our first awards, we had about 150 brands participate in that process. And then it just kind of grew from there. I guess the biggest, pivot is a very popular term these days with the whole, COVID crisis. Yeah. But our early pivot was really it was originally designed as just a franchise development tool to help facilitate that
more on the sales side, saying, okay, here are the testimony. These are the input from all these franchisees.
Yeah.
And is it the good and bad? Like, are you surveying, we survey franchisees' voice be heard, or?
Yeah, we survey everybody. I mean, that's part of the process. And, what we quickly realized is it was, really an operational tool first. 2/3 of the companies that we surveyed didn't have great validation with their franchisees at the time. And times have also changed significantly, where I think a lot of franchisors are much more sophisticated today, due to, private equity coming in and a whole host of other reasons. Back then it was kind of the Wild West of, selling franchises, and not everybody was that great at supporting franchises. So,
service them after you sell the opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot, and it's been fascinating to watch that in the industry. I love franchising. There's great opportunities out there, and some that are not so great, but that's what makes it interesting.
It seems like the top companies are really open to feedback and improving, and I'm sure your surveys help a lot. And then also just they're more like almost technology companies where
right.
they're
Yeah, I mean,
helping
when you,
so much on the tech stack. For
yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that you think about, like, again, going back 17 years ago, the tools that we think of today that everybody uses, whether it's Slack or, other tech tools in your business. I mean, those things didn't exist. And so, the feedback loop from franchisees is critical, and, helping candidates understand that in the validation process, but also helping the brands understand that operationally to kind of move the needle and help their franchisees be more successful is really what drives us today.
So the first time that you had this like massive inbound of franchisors and conducted the surveys, and roughly 2/3, had pretty big issues. Like, what were
Right.
some of the findings on the operational side that franchisees were upset with that the franchisor could address?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the biggest factor is that there's and it still exists to some extent today, there's often a disconnect between the franchise development team and the franchise operations side of the house. And so, naturally we all like to talk about, our best case scenarios, and, this franchisee is hitting it out of the park and, bought 10 units and everything else. But that may not be the average experience for the typical franchisee in the system. So I think it's really important that the development team and the operation team are on the same page, and that don't certainly oversell. And I think that's where franchising as an industry has done a lot of that in the past, where not that they've they're not selling sunshine and rainbows all day long, but it often seems a lot easier than it really is. And as as everybody that owns a business knows, small business ownership is hard. And
Yeah, the first two
certainly,
years are grind if you're not
yeah,
willing to put
yeah.
that time
And
in.
and I don't care if you're starting, Mike's Donuts or Pat's Donuts,
Yeah.
or you're buying into Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it's going to be a grind. And so, I think that that's where a lot of people get attracted to franchising, thinking, I want to own my own business, but I don't want to work that hard. And so franchising has it all figured out. And, franchising has a proven model for the most part, but it's still a lot of work. So I think that, having candidates really understand that, it does take time. I think the other aspect of business ownership that challenges all franchise companies is that individuals that are looking to be self-employed, they all, everybody has friends that own businesses and, are successful and make money, and they might own a boat or, play golf 3 times a week. But what they don't necessarily see is the, 10, 15, 20 years that individual, really invested in that business to get to that, lifestyle today. And so, a lot of people, they just want that lifestyle today, and they don't want to necessarily put in the grind. And so I think that's that I think franchise companies have gotten much better at explaining that, business is hard work. And so, you really need to understand, and we can help you. I mean, obviously franchise companies are very good at helping with those kind of aspects to make them a little easier. But at the end of the day, you're still the business owner and have to implement.
That's well said. And when you started FBR, Franchise Business Review, 17 years back, I'm sure most of the time it was the franchisor themselves selling the opportunity. And then
Right.
at the same office, and without this work from home and remote world we're in today,
Right, right,
they were together. Or I'm sure the operations folks were on the road too, but they
right,
were generally physically together. Where now work from home, remote work, and then also franchise sales organizations that
right.
are essentially outsourced sales efforts for
Yeah.
franchises.
Outside sales teams, brokers, there's lots of people that quote unquote represent franchise brands today. And so, it's kind of, candidates come in and become franchisees, and then it's the ops team's problem to support that person. Where I think, the best organizations are doing a much better job of, having operations involved very early on in that sales process to educate candidates and to validate,
It
is this
should be like
person.
one step, like after the second call or third call.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we just came back from the IFA conference, the International Franchise Association conference, and it was amazing how many people I spoke to at different roundtables where, their operations team has veto power, so to speak, on any new candidate coming into the system, which is, great. Again, it's not just, bringing in anybody that can write a check. I mean, obviously these brands know who's successful in their systems, what skills it takes, how much money you really need to have to be successful. And so to have operations, at the table, let alone have, that veto power is great.
Yeah, that's a great
That didn't
initiative.
exist 15 years ago.
And it's long-term incentives are aligned because, I mean, if the franchisor is making most of their money on the royalties as opposed to the franchise fee, that's recurring revenue. And
Right, right,
if one day they do want to sell to a private equity fund or IPO, the valuation is going to be significantly higher if they have
right,
this recurring revenue model as opposed to selling franchises, 20-30% of them close the first couple of years.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, that's, there's so many stories of brands that sold, to people that could afford to buy the franchise, but didn't necessarily have the skill set to run it. And now they've got these big territories that are taken up by, you know, average or lower performing franchisees. And so to be able to, really understand, I mean, that's the thing when I tell people, when you're looking at a franchise brand, you should feel like, it's a recruitment process, and they should be analyzing you as a candidate just as much as you're analyzing them. And if it feels more like a sales process, then you're probably in the wrong place.
That's well said. I mean, some of the best franchises, they don't even really recruit, or they're just hiring from within, like Domino's Pizza,
Right.
Dutch Bros Coffee. They're not there. You have to already be in the ecosystem and probably would have had to be already an employee, a manager to even be considered to be awarded a franchise license.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, there's, again, it should be a process just like the franchise operations process. And, if you feel like you're being sold some smoke and mirrors, then you probably are.
And how do you see it in terms of like hours worked, earnings? Because I've seen some of the reports you've shared on your site that have some pretty interesting insights in terms of how much money franchisees are actually making or how many
Right.
hours they're actually working, which the hours worked seem much higher than I would have anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, again, it varies significantly from, there's a lot of owner operators that just have one location, one business. And then there's lots of multi-unit owners that have a whole organization or a team to support those units. So, it is, I mean, obviously franchising goes across lots of different industries. So, if your dream is to own a business and make $50,000 a year and work 20, 30 hours a week, there's franchises that you can do that with. If you're, looking more for, to own multiple locations and build an empire, you're probably, you can do that and make hundreds, if not millions of dollars, but, you're going to need a much bigger infrastructure and a team around you. And, you'll probably be working more like, 40, 50, 60 hours a week and not
And
20
use
hours.
leverage, sign personal guarantees.
Yeah. 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 If you're reading the 4-hour work week and you're thinking about buying a franchise, it's probably not a good fit.
That's well said. Yeah, we do see a lot of that comments and feedbacks for like semi-absentee passive opportunities. And the reality is capital is super cheap right now in the US. You can
Yeah.
get a SBA loan for 5-6%. And if it's that easy to run the business, these businesses would just be opening up tons of corporate units and
Right. Right.
have managers in place. But the reality is
Yeah.
it's
I
not.
mean, yeah, it's so people dependent, obviously. So if you've got a great team of people and, you can plug them into XYZ franchise model to operate, yeah, you can be an absentee owner and investor in that and be successful. But, you're only going to be as successful as your team. And so, like you said, I mean, if it were that easy, there wouldn't be franchising. They would just, every store would be a corporate location. But they know it's very people specific.
And how does your process work? Like, does the franchisor engage you directly, or how does it work if there's a lot of franchisors that subscribe to our podcast and watch our videos? If they're in the learning mode and they're happy to get the feedback and they're going to act on it, How can
Right.
they start this survey process with you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when we started, we wanted it to be, open to every brand out there. So we still offer that. Any brand can participate in our survey process at no cost,
Oh, wow.
to be eligible for the award. So they don't, as part of the, quote unquote free model, they don't get the full data of the survey, but they can be eligible for the awards list. They'll get an overall score, against our benchmark. And so that's, a lot of companies will start there, but
Okay.
again, more established brands, really usually come to us first from an operational standpoint, because they want to know how they're doing. And many organizations today will be surveying their franchisees at, internally. So it's unique that someone's never surveyed their franchisees, but they want, our benchmark data to know how they compare to other systems that are out there, and then how they can, improve. And that's really, the benchmarking data and kind of the best practices that we can provide to go along with that is the, the value that we bring to the table.
That's well said. And in terms of the benchmarking, like besides hours worked for franchisees, what are some of the most important metrics that you're collecting and then benchmarking for franchisors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, the most important, I think, question in our survey is, do I trust my franchisor? There's 33 questions in there, that are standard. And then we ask a lot of custom questions too, but, and we've got the, would you recommend my franchisor? But, franchising is all about trust at the end of the day. And so franchisees that have a good relationship, positive relationship with their franchisor, and they trust that the franchise team is really taking the brand in the right direction. That's a big component. And, if you're working with a franchisor that's, everything is kind of, this is the way we do it, and we don't want to hear your opinion, and just do it this way. Those that used to work kind of in the old days, but now certainly, it's very much a franchisee franchisor, kind of partnership, if you will. The lawyers don't like to, use the term partnership, but, certainly that's the way, the most successful brands operate, is they see their franchisees as true business partners, and they engage them in that way.
And if you don't trust your business partner, I mean, that's going to make it pretty rocky,
Right, right. Yeah,
constantly
and
overlooking over your shoulder. And
right. And and it's hard in, when you think about any business, especially in the franchise industry. I mean, when a new brand comes out and they've got 10, 15, 20 locations, they're operating very differently. And then, they might start franchising and grow, to 100 or several hundred units in a few years. And so, under I mean, who their candidates are going to change. That profile of the ideal candidate is going to change over that time, but how they operate, also changes. And so I think that's a hard thing for a franchisee coming in, especially if you come into a new system where you might have, day-to-day interactions with the CEO of the founder of the brand. And then the system, gets larger and larger and larger, and suddenly you never hear from the CEO anymore. You're talking to a field support person or somebody lower down the chain of command. That can be hard for folks. But I think the brands that do it right, they have that team in place to really engage franchisees and treat them as true business partners.
so in terms of all these franchisees, I mean, there's some systems you're surveying that have 50, 100, 200. How do you make sure that they participate in the survey so that there's some minimal
Right.
threshold that's hit in terms of franchisees that are responding?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know how many franchisees you've met, but generally speaking, they like to share their feedback and speak their mind. So, I mean, we average a 70% response rate with most of the brands that we survey. Obviously, a little bit lower for some of the biggest brands that are out there. But yeah, I mean, when franchisees realize that we're a third party, and we're doing this from an operational perspective first and foremost, getting them to participate is pretty easy.
And is it
Uh,
private? Could it be used against them in some bad way? How does
it's
that work out?
Yeah, by default, it's anonymous. If they choose to share their identity, they can. In many, about 50% will share their identity. Um, and, it's just a great tool to help build that relationship with their operations support team. So that, again, you know, if it's general feedback that's going to help the brand, that's great. But if it's some specific issue that you're having in your local market, obviously by sharing your identity, it helps
You can get
the support
addressed.
team. Yeah, it can be addressed. And so, and I think that's what, most, franchisees feel, that if they have a specific issue, they want to share their identity. And, I think many of those issues are probably not, new items to the franchise team, but it is amazing that, I mean, we survey clients or have surveyed brands all the time, and all of them say, we learned so much from this that, we didn't know before. And that's really where the value comes, is that as a third party, they will share information with us that they may not share or may not get back to the top levels of the management team at the brand.
Any advice for like a franchise founder or CEO that's managing the sales team, managing the operations? Any advice to that CEO founder who's looking to really grow their franchise system in a sustainable way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always say, first of all, go slowly. I mean, because it's a lot easier to, make little mistakes and undo them than to go fast and make big mistakes. And so, obviously invest in a couple of locations yourself, make sure that, it works in different markets. And then as you start to franchise and get into different markets, really listen to the franchisee and understand, because, you run into situations where, the model may be proven, but it doesn't, it's got nuances in different markets, whether it be the size or geography or, I mean, even big brands like Dunkin' Donuts, when they went from New England, which was kind of their stronghold, down into the South, people don't drink as much coffee down South. They drink a lot of iced tea, and, little nuances like that really can change the brand. So, listen to the franchise owners and understand what their experience is, and, and really work with them to be successful. And, I think the biggest and the hardest thing for a new franchisor is especially, reinvesting in the brand to build up that operations and support team before you need it. Because, if you do it the other way around and you sell a whole bunch of franchises, but you can't support those franchisees, they're going to be unhappy. They're not going to validate the brand. It's going to stall franchise development going forward. So you really got to scale up your support team and make
I
that
imagine there's like
investment.
a 6-month training process to get a franchise operations person up to speed, because you can't just
Yeah,
have someone come in and the next week, oh, go train this person to do that.
right, right. No, it's true. And, what's interesting is that a lot of, I think, kind of middle road brands, if you look at their operations and field support people, they're really young, quote unquote kids out of college, whatever it may be, who, that's an important thing, especially as a franchise candidate, is, who's providing that day-to-day support, and what's their experience. And if you've got somebody that has been with the brand for 6 months and doesn't know business and doesn't know your local market, that really is not all that helpful. So, I mean, some of the best brands I've seen have really taken existing franchisees that have, really been successful in their system, and rotated them through support. So, again, sometimes they sell their units and come to the corporate team. Sometimes they find, somebody on their team to manage
General
those
manager
units.
or something.
Yeah, yeah. But having that experience is really, really critical.
The culture too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and it's really about understanding that operational component of, and coaching that franchisee versus, coming in with your clipboard and saying, oh, the bathroom's dirty. And, you got to build that relationship, from the ground up, and have it be about business success, not, checking off the checklist.
And I've met a few franchise systems where their head of development or a development manager was in operations for like 2 or 3 years.
Right.
and then went into the front office sales of the
Yeah.
organization. I think that's
Right.
pretty powerful.
Yeah, that I think that speaks wonders for a brand when you've got that kind of background. And, and if you see franchise development people that also own some of the units themselves, that's like, speaks volumes of the brand too. So like, again, what's your skin in the game?
Exactly. Well, that's great advice for franchisors. Maybe concluding, how about a franchise buyer? There's a lot of information out there. There's good information, bad information,
Right.
consultants, brokers. There's a lot of
Right.
intermediaries in this franchise
Lots
space.
of people to give you advice, right?
Exactly. But I'd love to hear from you where you actually have all this data on the franchisee reviews and
Right.
what's important for someone that's looking to buy a franchise.
Yeah, it's great. Great question. Because, as I said, I mean, understanding, that broad experience with franchisees in any system is critical. So, you want to talk to, I mean, whether you download some of our reports, you still want to talk to as many franchisees as you can, and understand that you're going to run into a variety of different experiences. So you may call a franchisee and catch them on a bad day, and they may be, really aggravated about XYZ about the brand. And, and if you're going to just run into that, but if you run into that a lot, that's obviously a red flag. And so really understanding, what are your strengths as a candidate, and where are you going to have to hire to make up for, some of your challenge areas, and how's the, how does that match up with the skills that it takes to be successful in a brand? And again, in those areas that maybe not an expert area of expertise for yourself, how does the brand, coach you through that? So, maybe you're strong in operations, but, not so good in sales and marketing. And so what does the brand provide to help support you in that? And then validate that with the franchisees as far as, are the marketing programs as good as they say they are the, sales programs as good as they say they are? And again, you're going to get a variety of answers from different franchisees depending on the day. But if the majority are, somewhat positive, that's generally a good sign. And and you can obviously see this when you're looking at a franchise disclosure document in item 20. How quickly are they growing? How many units have they maybe closed over a period of time? And so
Reacquired by the franchisor.
yeah, so you want to make sure that there's, when you talk to franchisees, how long have they been with the system? You want to talk to some newer franchisees. New franchisees are great at asking questions about training and support because they've most recently come
It's
through
fresh.
that program, and it's fresh in their memory. But you also want to talk to some more mature franchisees that have been with the brand 5, 10 plus years. And if you, in your due diligence can't find any of those mature franchisees, if it's all newbies, that's a, certainly a red flag too. But, I find that franchisees, like I said, they tell it like it is. They want to help candidates, because they were in their shoes, not long ago, and they will tell you the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think if you're realistic and, apply your good skill set, you'll be successful too.
I'm sure that franchisees don't want to like over embellish an opportunity because this guy might sign up for the franchise system and now he's on a Slack chain and they're communicating monthly and they see each other every
Right,
year.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you talk to franchisees, like I said, you're always going to talk to franchisees that are unhappy, and you want to kind of dig into that and find out why. And is it is it an issue that's systemic with the brand? Is it just something that this person is unique to that market? And understand, and address that certainly with the franchisor too. So like if somebody or a bunch of people say, marketing is, not easy to implement or whatever it may be, talk to the franchisor about that and hear what their feedback is. And again, everybody's experience and expertise and skill set is a little bit different. So, but generally speaking, the franchisees do clearly tell it like it is. And if they know that you're a serious candidate and see that you have the right skill sets, they'll be welcoming of, and ask them, would you do this again? knowing
I
what
like
you know
that. Would you
today.
do this again? And then what was the other one? Do you trust your
Do you
franchisor?
trust the franchisor?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's obviously an important thing. It's a long-term,
Like a
franchising.
marriage.
It's a 10, 15, 20-year marriage in some cases. So, and understand that broad vision of the franchisor, as well as what, where they see the brand going. As we kind of talked about, private equity has gotten involved. So you may hitch your wagon to a brand, and, private equity might come in after that, and that could change things. A new management team might come in, and that could change things. So, that's part of franchising, and being, flexible. And certainly, you hope that that's a good thing for the brand. They're going to invest in new systems or leverage other systems from other brands they may own. But it's important to kind of know that, that franchise relationship is a long-term relationship. So trust is a key component.
And it's necessary in like understanding like the franchisee too you're talking about, and like, are they having a bad day? But like ideally diving a little bit into their background. Like I talked to the founder of a franchise system where his most important criteria is they're not awarding franchise licenses to entry level folks graduating college. They want
Right,
you to already have success in your career over the last 5 to 10 years. So
right, right,
if there's a franchisee that signed up and he's not doing well, and has kind of struggled throughout his career and has bounced around a lot of different jobs and has never really hit his stride yet, then
right,
that's something that you should be mindful of when you talk to that franchisee.
right. Yeah, I mean, the other piece too is, we've got lots of companies on our awards list that are great companies, but, you know, every company's got a different culture, different personalities within their brand. And so, just because a company is well rated by us or some other source, doesn't mean that you're a natural fit for that company. So when you talk to franchisees, like, you want to understand, are these the types of people, that I want to hang out with? Because, those are the most successful franchisees are, working with their other franchisee, their co-franchisees in their system, and they're getting together multiple times a year, and they're sharing lots of information and best practices. And, if these aren't the type of people that you want to have a cup of coffee with or hang out at the bar with after a conference, maybe you should, look at a different
Look at
type of
another
company.
system. There's like 2,000 plus franchises available.
Right, right, exactly.
Well, Eric, this has been great. We're definitely gonna leave your contact information, a link to your website. Is there any other information you'd like to conclude with?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can look me up on LinkedIn or at the contact information below. But,
Perfect.
check out franchisebusinessreview.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions anybody has, whether you're a franchisor or a candidate or somebody in between.
Perfect, Eric. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.